Hello, good night. Welcome to another event of the 7th Festival Musicagem. I am João Batista Melo, composer, filmmaker, writer, and associated of Musicagem Association. I am going to mediate this chat together with my colleague Alex Pfeiffer, also composer, member of Musicagem Association. This time we'll have the pleasure of talking with one of the Hollywood most renowned composers, Richard Band. Richard Band has composed soundtracks for more than 120 films, including Reanimator, A Hora dos Mortos Vivos, Mutant, Troll, O Mundo do Espanto, Dragon World, Dragão de Estimação, and From Beyond, for which he won the Best Soundtrack Award at the International Festival of Fantastic Film of Catalonia. Creator of music for dozens of thrillers and horror films, he is one of the masters of the genre. But in his career, he has also created music for comedies, family, animations, and fantasy movies. He was one of the first Hollywood composers to make music for games, including Stonekeeper, Casper, Waterworld, and Clay Fighter. 10 of albums on CDs and LPs with some of Richard Band's soundtracks have already been released by the most prestigious labels of the genre. Let's start, shall we?
Yes.
Sure.
Welcome, Richard Band.
Hello. Hello, Musamagan. Hello, everybody. Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
For us, it's a pleasure your participation in Musicagem Festival.
Thank you.
For start, could you tell us how started your relationship with soundtracks world?
Say that again for me, Tom, please.
Hello. Could you tell how started your relationship with soundtracks?
Ah, okay. Well, let me see. That's going back a long time, so I'll try to do my best. I was brought up in a film family. My father was a producer, director, and writer. My brother ended up being a distributor and producer as well as a director. So I was brought up in the business, and I was always around filmmaking, although my first love was always music. And when I grew up, which was in Europe, in Italy, I was always surrounded by film, but I loved music first. And but it so happened that one day on a location shoot, we were in Spain. I was about 11 years old, and the first night in Madrid, we went to my father took us to a flamenco show, and I fell in love with the guitar. And the next day, I went out and bought a guitar and started learning how to play it. And and that's when music started for me. And subsequently, over the next 6, 7 years, I created my own bands. I toured around Italy and then Europe, but I never had film music in mind until one day I went into a recording session of a film my father had done, and I witnessed a scoring session. And that scoring session, I would find out later, the composer was Ennio Morricone. So I didn't know him at the time. Keep in mind, I was maybe 13 years old, but hearing the orchestra play the music for my father's film was something I never forgot. And then it was years later, after returning to the United States, that my first opportunity, I always had music that love, but that opportunity came up to do my first score. Of course, this was after I went to music school and had studied music and been involved with music for years. But the first opportunity came up to do a movie called Laser Blast, and I co-scored that with a fellow named Joel Goldsmith, who, by the way, was the son of Jerry Goldsmith, probably one of the greatest composers in the last 50 to 70 years. And from that point on, the rest is history. I did that first score. It was an all electronic score. And within a year, I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to do my second score, which was a big leap because my second score for a film called The Day Time Ended, I ended up recording with part of the London Symphony in London. So I went from a small electronic score to recording with a medium-sized orchestra within a year. And I'll tell you, when it's your project and it's your music and you're hearing it for the first time with an orchestra, it's like being hit over the head. It was something I'll never forget. And that's how it all started for me.
And Richard, it's a great pleasure to have you and to talk to you.
Thank you.
And one question is, it seems like you enjoyed classical music since you were little, right?
Yes, yes,
And then you toured with rock bands,
yes. Well,
right?
that's very true. When I was as young as I can remember, my father was always playing classical music in the house, Beethoven, Brahms, Bach, Wagner, you name it. And in fact, it's kind of funny. When I think I was 6 years old, and this was before we lived in Italy. It lived in France, Paris, France, for a year. And I would come home after school every day. and I would get up on the dining room table, and we had a phonograph player, and I would put on either Beethoven's Fifth or Beethoven's Ninth from beginning to end, stand up on the table and conduct it.
Oh,
I
that's
loved doing
amazing.
it. I did it every day. It was either the fifth or the ninth, one of those two. And at one point, after doing this for a few months, our maid was so taken with this that she actually hand sewed me a little tuxedo and bought me a baton.
Wow, that's amazing.
So then I would come home, I'd get in my tuxedo and baton, and then continue to conduct either Beethoven's Fifth or Ninth. That's how far back the classical music went. Then I
Conducting
got,
the
then I got corrupted with rock and roll. That was way later.
Oh, okay. So my question is, how these experiences influenced you as a composer? Because it's like different kinds of music, right? And how this influenced you as a composer?
You know, I never thought too much about that. I guess, you know, I think it's as musicians, when we start when we're very young, we start and we're very awkward, like with playing scales or whatever instrument you're on. And after a while, your brain doesn't think about it anymore. It becomes part of muscle memory. It's in your
Right.
muscles, right?
Yeah.
I think music was like that for me. Since I had been exposed to classical music mostly from when I was, you know, from a baby up through my childhood, it just became something that became part of me. So I think it was in my soul and in my bones. Later on, you know, in my early teens, when I got into rock and roll, be it because of the Beatles, the Beach Boys, the Rolling Stones, and then more progressive type rock and jazz and Frank Zappa and all these different things, that was the music of the day. And I was always, for years, up until when I started scoring, there was always a kind of a battle almost between the classical and the more progressive rock, jazz, or what have you. And it wasn't until I had started scoring that they started slowly to come together.
Oh,
So
that's great.
I didn't, they weren't, they seemed like two different worlds, but
Yeah.
I started to, after a few scores, bring them more and more together. And I think that's kind of how the genesis was.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine that these experiences were really positive because in the film scoring business, you need to like do like different genres all the time, right?
Very much so. Very much so. That is one of the more difficult aspects of film scoring. You get it's both good and bad in the sense that if you're not versed in various styles, then you're limited to the work you can do. And I think we're all limited to certain extents or have favorite styles. And it's both a benefit and a curse because, like in my case, I've been associated a lot with fantasy and horror films and some science fiction, and I'm most known for that. But I've done so many other things, family films, comedy, animation, and all these other things that I'm less well known for. That's the nature of any business, though. You know, you're gonna,
Yeah.
especially entertainment, you're going to get somewhat pigeonholed into one or two areas where people are going to know most of your work from. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
For me personally, even though I like horror films and I love fantasy films and all of that, personally, I even more than those, I love dramatic films, romantic films, films like Dr. Zhivago, Ryan's Daughter, the David Lean films, I would call them romantic films, in fact, most of which had beautiful themes associated. I'm a big believer in themes, and I felt it very important, and still do, that in my music and the films that I do, I try as much as possible to use themes, because I think modern day scoring is become very sound effect like, with the advent of so many samplers and sounds and all of this. Um, I miss hearing good themes. So from early in my career, uh, even with the horror and fantasy type films and science fiction films, I was always known to do good themes for those, which I consider to be very important in film music, and still do think so.
Yeah, and I agree. Uh, and just one question about themes. I heard you saying in an interview that the most important thing for a composer is to find the theme from that movie, what makes it unique, right? And so, what do you think that, what are the abilities that the composer needs to have to find that kind of unique theme and unique mood from the
Right.
movie?
Well, this is interesting because from the very beginning, I've always believed that film music, well, film is a two-dimensional medium. You have sight and sound. Um, I believe music, even though it's something we listen to, it's what I call and refer to as the third dimension in a two-dimensional medium. And that third dimension is crucial. It's the thing that not only helps the viewer see and feel what's on the film itself, and that's what they see on the film, and what they hear from dialogue is what I call the obvious. That's the first thing, and that's the story point. It's all of those things. But what does music do? Music does the third dimension. It introduces the very emotional aspects and mental aspects that drive the story point. So let me just give you an example. Let's say, take something simple. Let's say you have a chase scene, a car chase, let's just say.
Right.
So your average person could just do chaka 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 chaka, chase
Yeah.
music, right?
Right.
But my approach is, why do chase music? You see the chase, you hear the chase, there's sound effects and all this. Is that what the director and producer want? They want chase? Or, now this is where the composing comes in, or do you want to be reflecting what's in the mind of the person either chasing or being chased?
Right.
Right? Where do you want to, what does the music want to say? Maybe you're seeing a car chase, the same car chase, but you're in the mind of the person being chased, and he's feeling sad because his wife died or something. Maybe you want to play it sad, so you're playing against what you're seeing, but that's bringing out the third dimension, which is driving that character and the story from a deeper level. You want to
Right.
go deep. You have to understand what drives the characters, what drives the film. But at the same time, you have to satisfy the director and producer. You can't go completely against what they want, but it's very common, at least for me it is, to introduce ideas to the director or producer or both that give them an opportunity to explore a different way. So when it comes to themes, themes are the very ingredient, and it can be one theme, it can be two, it can be certain motifs, right?
Right.
Those are the very ingredients that I look for after analyzing the film, the characters and all of those sorts of things, that bring me to what should the theme say? And that's where I come up with it. That's how I come up with it.
Right. Yeah, I just remembered you said about like doing the music for the character, like what is he thinking or she. I remember that scene in Psycho that the actress is driving and nothing's happening. She's just driving. And then there is that Bernard Herrmann, like genius, and that music drives you crazy. Like, man, something wrong is going to happen.
Right, right. Because again, you can project what is going to happen, you can project what has happened, or you can project what's going on at that very moment. So in her mind, when she's driving, all she's doing is driving, right? Nothing else. But it's
Yeah.
the music that makes you feel that there's something frantic about where she's come from and where she's going.
Yeah, right. And
Richard,
João, do you have a question, please?
yes, a lot of questions for Richard. This is an opportunity.
Sure.
Richard, you say that you like of fantasy movies.
Yes.
Now we will watch main titles of a fantasy movie. The
Oh,
second video, please.
okay.
Hello, Caio? Yes.
I still like that theme.
I confess that I don't know this movie. I don't watch this movie. But it appears so delicate, so so beautiful, so nice, and your music uh, bring this sensation for watcher, I think.
Yes.
Uh, but I want one question to do about this. The movie theme has something of Celtic or Irish music with a flute, and, and it is very beautiful. Is common in the world of soundtracks, but I imagine it that is always challenging to work with music of another country, another culture. And uh, could you talk about your experience of using different music styles from other countries, other cultures,
Yes.
like in this movie, for example?
Yes. I understand the question. Well, first of all, this rather than Irish, this was actually Scottish. from Scotland, because it takes place in Scotland, so it's more Scottish than it is Irish. But you have a good question, because I've been confronted many times with how to write music for other cultures, other countries. At the time, actually before I even did Dragon World, I did another movie called Sword Kill, and not a good name, but it was actually a pretty good movie, and it was about a samurai who was brought back to life, that they found him in ice somewhere in Japan, and they brought him back to life. And even though it's sort of science fiction, it was a very emotional film. And I actually recorded that with the Royal Philharmonic in London. But more importantly, because the whole film took place around the samurai, I wanted to introduce instrumentations that had to do with that culture. And to make a long story short, there was a great American composer, basically from in the 19th century up to 20th century, named Harry Partch. I don't know if you know him. Do you know who Harry Partch was?
Yes.
Okay, well, Harry Partch was not only a very unique, very interesting composer, but he created his own instruments. He built his own instruments as well. And most of them were percussive in nature. Not all, about say 60%. And he dealt with microtones as well. And he also, because he built these instruments, had to create a way to write for them that was not the way we normally read music today. Anyway, this is a long story, but I'll shorten it. His disciple was a fellow named Emil Richards, and in Los Angeles, Emil Richards was known as the premier #1 percussion player in the entire industry for 30 years. And he was a disciple of Harry Partch's and inherited, when Harry Partch died, all of his instruments. So I thought it would be fascinating to incorporate not just 5 or 6 Japanese instruments, but because of the percussive nature, a lot of Harry Partch's instruments. So for a week, I recorded with 8 percussionists all of Harry Partch's instruments, or not all, but many of his instruments, and as well as 2 premier Japanese players on shakuhachi, flutes, and shinghai, and various Japanese instruments. I pre-recorded those and then went to London and recorded the Royal Philharmonic on top of those instrumentations. Now, to be able to do that, and this gets back to Jean's original question, I had to do research. So I went to the UCLA Music Library and spent about 2 weeks there researching about all the instruments and scales that were used not only in the past, but in Japanese culture. And then I came home and incorporated what I had learned into my composition. So in the way that you just heard Dragon World, and that very sort of Scottish feel of Dragon World, similarly, I had researched certain themes and certain scales that were commonly used in Scotland, and then digested that and came back home and started experimenting with those particular modes and scales, and knowing which instruments I wanted to use on top of the orchestra, how to get across that feeling that you hear in that main title, because it had to be not only a pastoral sort of beautiful feeling, but it had to have an element of sadness, because there's a lot of sadness in that movie that goes along with the adventure of that movie. It's about a little boy who grows up and finds a baby dragon, and they grow up together. And then at one point they have to separate from one another because the modern world can't deal with a dragon. So it's really about the boy and his pet dragon. So it's actually a very emotional film, and many people went to see that in the theaters, and then later on were crying at the end because it's so sad when they have to part. So it had to be emotional, it had to be sadness, then there had to be adventure as well, and all of those ingredients. And so again, going back to the very first things we talked about, is that third dimension in filmmaking, being the music, is how do you intelligently score a film other than just accentuating what you see? How do you get underneath it? How do you get inside of it? That's always been what I want to do the most. And if you manage to do that, you'll end up probably writing a good score.
Very interesting. And at the Sunday, the Orchestra Ouro Preto will play the music of Dragon World
Great.
without the original instruments, of course.
Okay, that's okay. That's okay.
Another question,
Yeah.
changing the subject. Um, you made a lot of movies of thrillers and horror too. And how do you compose a thriller and horror soundtrack? The common sense says that it is just a matter of adding some dissonances, some atonalism, but it is not as simple as that, is it?
No, 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 no. It I take you back to the early 80s. I did a score, one of my first, I'd say one of my first 10 scores was a film called House on Sorority Row. And that film was uh, it was at a time where there were a lot of films coming out, and they were called slasher films. Slasher films meaning it was horror and somebody would be slashed with knives or cut with knives. And so the genre was called slasher films. Anyway, so there was this film I did, and it could have been classified as a slasher film, but I went completely against the grain, and I wrote a beautiful theme for the main title, and it was one of the best reviewed soundtracks I ever did. People couldn't believe that I would write such a lush, beautiful score for such a slasher film, right? And again, that came from my firm belief of everything we've been talking about, but accompanied with the fact that I really believe in themes in scoring, because a theme or motif, or themes and motifs, plural, it's one of the great ingredients we have as musicians to grab something in the audience that they will remember. Nobody will remember if you have a dissonant chord. No? Nobody
Right.
remember if you have strings playing a high E and an E flat. Nobody's going to remember this, right? But if you have a good theme, they're going to remember that. And more importantly, with the use of themes, and themes that are attributed to certain characters in particular, then they understand, or it helps them to understand emotionally where those characters are. So, so that's an example of again how I believe strongly in themes, but that doesn't mean you can't use dissonance. It's just, what it really means is that when you're using dissonance, you're using it for a more important reason, and it's going to mean more. It's like, it's also very true in horror films, and this I've tried to stress for many years, is there's a tendency to overscore horror films. They say, oh, we need to make this scary, right? You know, so put some dissonance, put some music in, do this, whatever. You know what? Sometimes the scariest thing of all is no music.
Yes.
So it's the lack of music sometimes that is scarier than the music. But if you do it right, when the music comes in, then it means that much more. Then it's making a point. If the music is wall-to-wall music in a film, it just becomes background. It doesn't really affect you. The music, good scoring, should affect you.
Yeah.
At least I think so.
Yeah.
So the judicious use of music in film is important, which is, of course, in the spotting, when you spot a film to see where the music should go. But even more importantly than that is, why are you putting music in there? What do you want it to say? That's the point. What should the music be saying? And that's why you sit down with the director and producer, whoever's in charge creatively, and the first and most important thing is to be very, very clear on what the music is supposed to do. What do they want it to do, and what do you think it should do? And so I try to stay away from dissonance in horror. Not that I don't use it, I have used it, but I try to use it where it means something, and I try to use themes and motifs where they're most effective for the development of the characters or the study, or the story rather.
Okay. Alex,
Yeah.
another question I have.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions too.
We
So,
could
Richard.
stay all the night here.
Oh, yeah, 5 hours. Easily. So, Richard, related to what you just said about the relation with the director, nowadays we have an element that changed the relationship between composer, producers, and directors. It's the temp track, right?
Yeah, yep.
So, could you please explain to our audience what is a temp track and what's your opinion about it?
Okay, well, a temp track is another invention of modern technology. When it comes to the producers and directors, for many years, the one element of filmmaking that they did not have control over was the music. So basically, they would put their trust in the composer would write the music, they would go score it, and hopefully it would be okay, and the producers and the director would like it.
Right.
Most of the time that worked out. But the directors and producers always want more control. They want control over everything. So as technology advanced, and film became available on video like we're doing now, you no longer had to shoot on actual film. You could shoot on tape, videotape, digitally. All these technological advances made it so that you could just as easily put some music against your film or your video or your digital medium, and that way the producer or director, they could give you, the composer, or anybody else, prospective buyers, exhibitors, whoever, they could then show kind of the feel that they wanted that scene or their movie to have. So it's been both a blessing and a curse. The blessing part, more for the producers and directors, is they get to creatively get their sort of image across what they would like to hear.
Right.
The curse is that more often than not, they'll take soundtracks that they hear, that they love, and let's say they take Star Wars, right? And so they have a 100-piece orchestra with John Williams, and they take that piece of music and they put it in their film that they're making for $500,000. And then they come to the composer and they go, this is the feel and the sound we want. Not knowing that the budget for the music for Star Wars was probably 7 times the amount than their entire movie was, right? And they say, well, they need it in 2 weeks, not knowing that Williams had 4 months. So it gets crazy what their wants are. But then worse than that for the composer is then locked in to what the director or producer, whoever's in charge, they fall in love with that temp score and they say that's what they want. So they're then right off the bat, they're taking the creative process away from the composer.
Yes.
So they have more control. So then it's become common now that when we're given something to score, not all the time, but a good 60-70% of the time I get something and there's some sort of temp track on there. So my first job is usually to try to dissuade them to forget everything about that temp track, to try to get them to forget about it. The only way that you can succeed in that, again, with modern technology, is try to come up with a couple of things that you can then show them would work as good or better than what they had in mind originally. But it's a battle that is a modern day battle, and many directors and producers, they don't care what you want. They just want you to make it sound as close as you can to what they give you. What can I say? I don't like it. It takes away your creativity, and it creates problems, and it's not a good thing. That's all I can really say about it. It's not a good thing, but it's part of what the business is today.
Yeah, we have to deal with it, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunate, very unfortunate. And it's interesting that a lot of younger composers, they like temp scores. I talk with a lot of them and they seem to like it, but the reason they like it is what confounds me, because they like it because they don't have to make hard decisions about their creativity.
Yes.
It makes it easier for them. Oh, this is what they want. Okay, I'll give them what they want.
Yeah, they get a direction, right?
Yeah. And to me, well, then you're not being creative. You're basically kind of copying, what somebody else did, and what somebody wants. You're not bringing real creativity into it. So
yes,
it's got a lot of problems with it. And personally, I don't like it. And like I said, the way I deal with it is I always do my best to throw it out and start something new. But you have to show them that your idea is better.
right.
And that's kind of what it comes down to.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So we have a question from our audience. I will try to say the names like the best that I can. So Yexei Kurtkijan, could you tell us a little bit about your partnership with Brian Yushna, please?
Okay. Well, Brian Usna, for those of you who do not know, was the producer of Reanimator. He was also the producer of From Beyond. He was also the producer of a few other projects that I did. One was called Initiation, also Bride of Reanimator. He produced that. In fact, I'm sorry, Brian, he produced that, but he also directed it. So he's both the producer and director. On Reanimator and From Beyond, he was the producer, and Stuart Gordon was the director. On Bride of Reanimator, he was the producer and director. And on Initiation, he was the producer director. So he does both.
Right.
And so to this day, I have a very good relationship with Brian. In fact, I just saw him a week ago, and he's a very talented man, and with a lot of energy and good ideas. And right from right from the start with Reanimator, luckily I had a good relationship not only with Brian but with Stuart Gordon, the director, and so that's how I know Brian, and that's our relationship. And like I said, we've worked together on, I can't remember, I think it's 4, maybe 5 or 6 films at this point, and probably
Right.
will in the future.
That's great. João, do you have a question?
Yes, of course. Now, one question more philosophical.
Okay.
Um, I am a composer, but I am a soundtrack collector for many, many years. And I was able um, to identify when I listen a music, a soundtrack of John Barry, of Elmer Bernstein, of Goldsmith, of Richard Band, Bruce Bragdon. But in recent times, new composers has emerged and appeared a new soundtrack format with less emphasis on melodies, more focused on the use of textures, effects, sound design, and in general, I am not able more to identify who is the composer of the soundtracks that I listen. I
Yes.
need to read the main titles, the CD cover. What do you think about these changes in the soundtrack styles from the past recent to today? I don't know if I was able to explain.
No, I understand. I understand perfectly. I understand. Um, well, there's definitely, we touched on this earlier, and that's why I was stressing my belief in themes, because there is a marked difference between soundtracks for films and television uh, dating back, you know, before, say, roughly 10 years ago. There has been a transition to more texture and sound effecty type of scoring. Uh, I, I I won't say that it's wrong. I don't think anything is wrong, um, and I think it can be effective for certain things. But the problem that I see is that it's becoming something that everybody is using. And the reason they're using this, in my opinion, the people composing these scores, is because you have thousands of people creating every day all of these plugins for our computers. Every plugin has a unique sound or sounds, many sounds, hundreds of sounds, whatever they are. So you end up with a template of hundreds of plugins with tens of thousands of different sounds. And to be honest, what happens, and I run into this myself, something strange happens when you're confronted with all of this technology. You have to take time to learn how to use the technology. And that's a big problem. The first 20 years I was composing film, for film and television, mostly film, the first 15 or 20 years, I had a piano, music paper, a lot of pencils or pencil sharpeners, an eraser, my Knudsen book, and that was it. There wasn't anything else. So if I sat down and I was writing for 10 or 12 hours a day, I was writing music 10 or 12 hours a day. Today, if I sit down in front, and I think you can see behind me some keyboards and computers.
Yes.
I sit down today and spend the same 12 hours, I guarantee you 6 of those hours is spent trying to figure out how to use these plugins. So my creative writing time is cut in half right off the bat. And if your creative time is cut in half, and then you add the fact that the producers and directors and companies, they want the music faster and faster and faster. They come and they say, well, I need this next week, right? And you're saying, excuse me, that's 40 minutes of music in a week. Are you crazy? They say, well, yeah, but we need it next week. So then all of a sudden, your 12-hour day is cut by half because you have to screw around with all the technology. Then they only give you a week or whatever the amount of time is. How much time do you have to be really creative?
Yes.
It's a big problem. And so it doesn't surprise me that a lot of these more modern day composers, they're taking the easiest route they can because they're being forced to. They don't have the time to be really creative or to really figure out things like some of the things we've been talking about, really analyzing what this and meeting and doing all this stuff. It's get it out now, fast, everything fast, right? That's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is stylistically, I think some have just become kind of lazy, and they don't take the time to really analyze what the film needs. And of course, it depends. I mean, it depends on whether you're doing film, whether you're doing television, whether it's a series. But the whole style that Jean was talking about, it has become more textural and sound effecty and less thematic and less motivic. And I don't particularly like it. I mean, I've done some of it if it's appropriate. If it's appropriate, fine, I don't care. Maybe it's appropriate for some things, but it seems as though too many people are doing that same sort of thing, and I don't find it very creative or interesting most of the time.
Yeah. Uh, I agree. I totally agree with you, Richard. But we need to, as you said, is the business nowadays, and we need to do our best, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it is what it is, right? And so you need to do the best you can under the circumstances that you're allowed. That is
Yes.
true.
Yes. So,
And
Richard, sorry,
sometimes,
John,
excuse me.
please.
And sometimes the producers and directors request the same thing of the same thing. Sometimes the producers and the directors request the repetition, that
Yes,
the things repeat the same music forever.
that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. But you know what? I mean, I'm only speaking for myself now. This is one of the reasons that I've always maintained and stayed pretty much with the independent filmmaker. Um, yes, I've done television, I've done series, I've done some for big studios and all that, but I prefer to work with independent productions and because they allow me to be more creative. I could have made a lot more money doing certain television things, and I would be doing the same thing week after week after week. And um, I just don't. I've never liked that. I like to be more of my own boss, and I like to be my own creator. and try to contribute creatively to a project. And that's more of what my interests have been throughout my career. I like the independence and I like the process. I've been lucky enough to be able to make a living for 42 years at this. Thank goodness for that. I don't know if I'll be working next year, but who knows? You know, I didn't know last year if I'd be working this year. Who knows? Right?
Yeah.
But
Nowadays with the pandemic,
right.
man, it's
Yeah, who knows?
yeah.
You just don't know. But at least I can, at the end of the day, when it's all finished with, I can say that I kind of did this my way, and I was more independent, and because of that was able to be more creative. And that's where my personal interests were, more than just being successful and making money or something. If that's not where it was for me, it never was.
Right, right. So, Richard, unfortunately, we have to close our session.
No
We are
problem.
having our time. But one last question is, how about your future projects? What you're working on right now? We'd like to know that, and we'd like to thank you again for your time. It's a really great pleasure to have you here. So please, your future projects and nowadays what you're working on.
Okay, well, thank you. I just finished a film. It's a genre film called Night Caller. I just finished that 2 days ago,
Right.
and I'm now moving on to actually a very interesting project. It's actually a movie that's been literally in the making for 28 years.
Whoa.
Yeah, and it's called Primevals. It was originally started and directed by the famous David Allen, who was famous for at being Ray Harryhausen's protege, and then he became very big with stop animation and with all the great movies that had to do with stop animation. It's probably the last movie that was ever made where it's all stop animation, live action and stop animation. And it's a nice, good sized project. The reason it's taken 25 years or so is it was shot about 20 years ago, filmed, but then after about 7 years, they ran into some problems, and then about 7 years after that, David Allen died.
Wow.
But it was then kept and resurrected years ago by David Allen's protege and a company that would finance finishing the film, because it was already shot. All the live action was shot,
Okay.
but the stop motion had to be finished. About half of it was done. So it's
Right.
taken about 3 years, believe it or not, to finish the stop
Oh
motion.
my.
And so that one is a project I've actually been contracted to do for 7 years, and it's finally going to happen. So that's I'm going to start writing in the next couple of weeks or so. That's the next one on the plate, and I'll be recording that with a live orchestra, probably in Bratislava, and so that's the next thing up, amongst a few other things. But that's the next one that I'm very excited about, because I'll be able to use a real orchestra again, and it's a big, exciting adventure project. So
That's great.
that's what's next up.
Amazing.
Yeah, hopefully
That's
it will be.
wonderful.
Yeah. And I want to thank all of you for letting me participate in the festival, and I hope this was good for you. And I also hope that maybe in the next few years we'll be able to do it again, but in person, in real person, not virtually. That would be great.
Of course.
Yeah, yeah. Please.
Richard, thank you very much for
Thank
your
you, John.
participation, for
Sure.
this time wonderful that you bring for us. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
And we are looking forward to see you, reencounter you in the future, in the future festivals in person, of course.
That'd be fantastic. I look forward to that. And feel free to contact me anytime. And I'd love to hear some of the music some of you guys are doing. So feel free to send me some stuff. I'd like to hear it too.
Oh, that's great.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
very
And
nice.
I look forward to tomorrow night's concert.
Yeah.
Yes, a wonderful concert
That's
with
fantastic.
two musics of Richard Band. Two
Yeah.
And
wonderful musics.
thank you.
And in a few minutes at 20 and 30 in Brazil time, we will have another chat with Craig Saffin. And thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye
And
bye.
thank you
God,
for all the staff too. Marta Ricardo
Yes,
translating,
of course.
Marco
Caio.
Souza, Caio.
thank you, everybody. Bye
And
bye.
thanks for the audience. Bye bye.
Yeah, thanks for all of you watching us.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. See you soon.
Okie doke. Bye bye.